Hi, my name is Jacqueline Cosgrove. I'm the health reporter at the Oklahoman. I've been working on a story about the shortage of child psychiatrists in Oklahoma. And joining me today is Mike Brose, the Executive Director of Mental Health Association Oklahoma. Thank you so much for being here, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Jacqueline.
So in Oklahoma, I think we've concluded that there are about 60 child and adolescent psychiatrists across the state, although we're not sure how many of them are maybe practicing. It's kind of a hard number to find. But what does that mean for families that have children with serious mental illness?
Well, when you talk about that, up to 20% of kids in our state could benefit from consultation, or families could benefit from consultation from a mental health professional, and some of those will need medication. Our child psychiatrists are key people to provide that service. That means there's going to be a lot of long waiting lists, and there's going to be time and difficulty getting in. Payment becomes an issue. That becomes a huge barrier in addition to the waiting list. So while that, I think it's actually a little higher than what we thought, but again, your point well taken. How many of those are actually boots on the ground that are out there seeing families versus academic settings? That's not to take away from those other roles, but I've been in practice here in Oklahoma for 35 years. It's hard to access child psychiatrists for the family. Yeah.
Well, and they're only operating, I think the one estimate I saw was in 8 counties. So that means that a lot of parents are having to do a lot of far driving, and transportation can be an issue, especially for lower income families.
Absolutely. You've got the rural metro area. The majority of them are located in the major metro areas. Again, so driving, as you pointed out, is a big deal, what have you. And again, that's for some of the families we're talking about. That in itself is a huge barrier for them. Time, money, expense, access, and again, we're not on this, but just in general, accessing the mental health care system in its many facets is a challenge unto itself without all these other factors.
Right. And I talked to a rural family physician, and he talked about how he feels comfortable up to a point treating children with mental illness.
Right.
He said it's about 20% of the kids he sees have some kind of mental health issue that he's treating, but then he gets into these antipsychotic medications and he gets a little nervous about, he said, I wish I had like a phone a friend where I could call and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. It's almost like you need telemedicine for the physicians. And I know that other states have tried some different collaborative models where, the pediatricians and family physicians are talking more with, child psychiatrists. So, we're not saying this shortage is going to be fixed tomorrow, but it's a way that that shortage can be better served by the physicians out there who are in the communities.
Do I want us to be working collaboratively with all of our different higher ed, our residence programs, all of our different efforts to try to attract and have more child psychiatrists? Yes, but the reality is we'll never have enough. So how do you offset that? Well, one is, as you've touched upon, is some sort of system, a system that is functional, that operates in a way so there's a formalized communication system. So your pediatricians, your primary care docs, in not only in your metro areas but all of those across Oklahoma, can have a place where they can call. And what your doc is asking there that you talk to, phone a doc, what have you. Again, telemedicine isn't just for between patient and the mental health professional or the physician or whatever the case may be, but I think to have physicians be able to access those individuals, because these medications are very powerful. They are, in some instances, they can be almost miraculous. But in other instances, with children, they need to be very carefully used. Their efficacy, their effectiveness, if there's side effects. No one wants their children over-medicated. We hear that a lot. It takes a lot of work, and to leave those primary care docs, those pediatricians out there without that access, they're either going to be doing things that maybe they're not really fully trained for, or they're going to back off and people are not going to get the services at the level that they need.
Sure, and that's one concern you hear from parents is if my child isn't getting those early interventions and getting, treatment early, I've talked to families where they're trying to be really proactive in anticipating the illness and trying to treat the child early with different types of therapy and medications to where maybe in adulthood the disease won't be as exacerbated and as bad. I mean, it's like thinking about having type 1 diabetes and not really treating it haphazardly until you're an adult.
Right, yeah, and that is early access, really access to that care, what have you. And then we have an issue between the community, when someone does get in to see, a child gets in to see a child psychiatrist, or they have access to that information, we run into over and over again the lack of communication between that person and maybe another mental health professional, like a licensed clinical social worker or a licensed professional counselor, who is also treating that child and that family, and there's not good communication between the child psychiatrist, the medication management, and the other mental health professional, and or sometimes between those mental health professionals in the school setting, where we always forget that our schools, they spend a lot of time with our kids, and they see and know a lot of things sometimes that we don't always know, and that's really good information. So this is it's a very complex thing, and we need our leadership, and I include myself in that, is that we need to do a much better job with all these things.
Yeah, I mean, just anecdotally, I've heard from teachers, if I have a child in my classroom who has a mental illness, no one's going to particularly tell me that, there's a debate about privacy, but at the same time, understanding kind of where a kid is at could be really helpful for a teacher in understanding how to kind of interact with that child in the classroom. That's what I hear from my teacher friends.
I've dealt with it all my 35 years of practice, and I try to talk about need to know. Who needs to know what? There are people in that school who don't necessarily need to know what's going on, but you know what? If it's my son, my wife and I's son, and he's out of school now, but when he was in school, if he was needing those kind of services and he was going through a particularly difficult time about something and getting treatment for it, I think I would like his teachers to know something about what's going on so they could maybe be a little more sensitive and understanding to what he or she is going through in the classroom. And I think it is a huge landscape there in terms of, again, that communication. It's not just about enough child psychiatrists. That's a big part of it, but it's also about taking advantage of the resources that we have in being much more efficient, more intentional, more organized. And, I want the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services to take more leadership on that. As an advocacy organization, we need to take more leadership on that issue. We need to work together. We need our State Department of Education to take more leadership on that issue too. They need to be at the table and saying, this is what we want. I'm get off on my deal, but again, school counselors aren't really school counselors. They're academic advisors. But yet we take solace in hearing, there's my child's school, high school has 4 school counselors. Well, they're really 4 academic advisors, and we need to address that in that role and function. And I really want State Department of Ed, advocacy community, and the State Department of Mental Health, we all have responsibilities on these issues.
Yeah, I talked to one parent who said that exact thing, that she has a son and he has mental health issues, and she's like, the school counselor isn't going to help him. They're out there just to do the schedule, and she's in this pool of people that I was talking to someone at North Care. They're adding a child psychiatrist once a week starting in September, and I asked the person I was talking to, I said, well, what about for the folks who are uninsured? Because he said for uninsured people, we can try to find them a provider. It might not be a child psychiatrist, but someone who's comfortable treating those illnesses. But for the uninsured folks, he said, well, there's not really much of an option. And that just really surprised me how, there's just sort of this pool of uninsured people who are really struggling to get their kids the care that they need for their illness.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, again, all professionals want and need to be paid, and organizations that hire them, they've got budgets to meet and payroll to meet and bills to pay too. But unfortunately, because again how we're structured, still that here is an example of someone who is low income, and they're going to be on the other side of the glass looking in. And they're going to be excluded from those services from the way you described, where on the other side of the glass, those that have resources are going to be able to access that. And again, not always. It isn't about how much is in your bank account, but sometimes it's those kids on the other side looking in, and those families are some of the most deserving and needing individuals who really need that highest and best care that we could possibly provide them.
Well, Mike, is there anything else that you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
Well, I mean, I think this is a big deal. Again, I think we need to do more to help recruit more child psychiatrists. We need to help them figure out ways to, I mean, you're talking about a huge amount of debt that they are going to create. And I think we need to, and we see sometimes they go out of state for their training and they don't come back. We need to figure out ways to draw them back and have incentives built into it so they'll come back to the state and practice and be here. And so we don't lose our best and our brightest to other locations around the country. And so that would be the last thing I would mention, but really appreciate you covering this because it's a very important topic.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Mike Brose with Mental Health Association Oklahoma, talking about the shortage of child psychiatrists in Oklahoma. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Jacqueline.